Well, we would like more people in the audience because I think, especially if there are early stage startups outside, if somebody can pick them up. So this is a pretty interesting session done by Mridula and Mirik. That's why I said I'll introduce them. Needs a good introduction as well. That's why. You see, because these two guys are not VCs. They cut their own checks. That's a slightly different thing from VC managing somebody else's money, correct? And they have had their skin in the game. Mridula has been at this for quite some time. Mirik probably a bit less, but still pretty significant skin in the game. So my pleasure. Why don't you guys come up? I would like to give a brief introduction, and then it's over to you. Why should I be in the middle? I want we requested them to have a discussion, impact talk, a bit of discussion on how they look at investing for impact. As they said, both of them have been cutting their own checks. So that's a pretty interesting thing. But before that, let me give a very brief introduction. I'm not going to introduce Mridula because I have introduced her too many times, and she probably doesn't need much of an introduction for the Climafixers. Still, I shouldn't leave it completely blank. Mridula, she dons many hats. She is part of Chennai Angels, prominent angel network from Chennai. She is an investor herself in her own right. She is also director at Sundaram Roadways, Sundaram Textiles. She also runs Sundaram Climate Initiative, a very busy lady. So I'm glad that she finds time to come to our event year after year and really support us. From a climate point of view, as I said, in addition to investing, she has written books. She is deeply involved in it. Both her books are available, by the way, for those of you who didn't hear my marketing pitch. In the 6th floor, one on climate action, another on water sustainability. That's Mridula for you. Mirik comes from a different background. His family runs one of the largest chemical companies in the country, Aarti Group. And he has been, once again, putting his skin in the game, IIT Bombay guy. He has been looking at the segment for some time. He has gone beyond what a typical investor does in whatever the areas he has been working on. He has also invested in centers of excellence at IIT Bombay. So I think there's a lot of work he has done, and I'm glad that he could be here as well. So I'm going to leave it to these guys 30, 40 minutes when they can tell you people. I'm hoping that there are enough early stage startups here, how they look at investing for impact. I had a couple of questions to them, which I have sent to their WhatsApp, but if they wish to ignore my WhatsApp, I'm not going to leave them. I'm going to say those questions here. 3 questions I have from them. I leave it to them whether to answer them or not during the discussion. 1, well, they are putting the money in the game, but are they willing to put a serious amount of money in the game in impact, especially if the startup, which has a high impact, also carries high uncertainties? That is, they are cutting checks, no doubt, but maybe these are small checks which really doesn't hurt them much. But are they willing to cut serious checks for companies with high impact, which may also have startups with high impact, which may also have high uncertainties? This is question number 1. The second is, they have been looking at climate domain for some time. Which are the subdomains they have found really interesting when it comes to impact? And the third is, what is their suggestion? What are their suggestions for early stage startups, especially those working on impact, from what they have done so far? So 3 quick questions. 1 is, are they willing to cut serious checks for high impact startups, especially those carrying high uncertainties? What are the domains they found interesting within climate impact for investments? And thirdly, what are the suggestions for early stage climate startups? As I mentioned, these are our questions, but they have their own plans. Mridula, Mirik, go ahead.
Can you guys hear me? Great. Just to get a sense of the audience, how many of you are startups here? Okay, great. Anybody who are fellow investors here? Okay, so good. So this is a good. We know how to pitch this. You wear many hats, Professor. So yeah, I think Narsi has gone on, on many. He's given I think first, thanks Narsi for having us here. It's great to be here. It gives us hope. As Narsi said, very delicately put it, I'm quite old. I've been doing this for almost a decade now. So it's like really old. So with that, I'm just going to, Mirik and I declined the moderator. So we're going to find out how our moderating skills are. I hope this can become a conversation. And I mean, the first thing as startups, and this is something that really bothers me, is that many startups, and look, you guys want to live to see another day, but you very often end up putting the cart before the horse, which is driving your need for money before solving the problem. And part of that is just because of desperation and lack of options, but part of it is lack of knowledge also. So, Mirik, can you talk about what are the types of capital that startups can access? I mean, or the capital stack, as it were, and how should the audience here think about what capital to access, when, and for what purpose?
So yeah, I think a lot of you got an intro of me of the earlier panel, but so to this question, I think one thing that we realized in the last 4 or 5 years that we have been working with early stage companies is the capital stack mindset actually comes from the early tech startups, like the Bangalore tech startups in a way, which are more IT and information and things like that. And in those kind of things, it's all about growth. It's all about an exponential growth. You are either a D2C company and you want to get market access. But those capital stack requirements are different. Now the VCs are generally also attuned to those capital stack requirements. So any new startup coming into the system, that's a natural thing for them to learn about, because that's where the whole thing is going. But if you look at climate, and if you look at deep tech broadly, there is going to be a lot of asset investment that has to take place. Your iteration journey is also going to be much slower. So for you to create a prototype and then create the second prototype, it's not like in a week you can roll out another product. So in that ways, the capital stack eventually also will be quite different. So if I look at it, the role of debt is going to be very much more important. And that's not at the early stage, but once your product is out there, actually you don't really require too much equity at that point of time. You can really go for debt. And debt financing will be quite crucial. At an early stage level, it's a combination of, I think, the collaboration, whether grant opportunities are, I don't think are there too much in India, but accessing whatever is there, that is important. And I think that is also, as an ecosystem, that is something that is growing. Working with the academia closely, because we were discussing with just someone earlier today, I don't know, Harsh is there here. So he mentioned that he is able to access the lab of IIT Madras and getting all the instruments which are of crore rupees or whatever, something like that, and he's able to access that. So effectively what you are doing, that's a different kind of a capital stack that you are able to access, right? It's not financial capital, but in the end, you are able to reduce your cost. So the focus on this cost element and understanding this, and one more example that we had in the past was people trying to just do everything from equity. I think there is a role of working capital finance. You can do so much things around debt also differently, whether it's term debt or working capital finance, that sometimes just people want to raise equity and say, okay, I will fund the whole thing like that. I don't think that will work. You will dilute yourself too much too soon. So in that way, I think the role of different financial stacks becomes very, very crucial in climate specifically, more than anything else. So I don't know, what's your experience?
No, I'll just add a couple of things. A lot of you guys go to these investment firms or these boutique guys to help raise capital, and they don't have a knowledge of some of these other types of capital, and their incentives are not aligned with those kinds of capital. So just be a little careful there. One of the things that many of my startups have done is to set up parallel structures. Yeah. So one non-profit and one for-profit. So you can access a lot of the grant and non-profit funding that is coming. Yeah, I know it's very difficult and you need money to survive the other day, but it's good to sort of step back and look at what type of money, especially who you partner with, because a lot of grant capital, like he was mentioning, IIT Madras, partnering with an institution like this will open up those things. So when you look at accelerators, etc., they'll say, look, we want 4% of your equity. Great, sure, but think about all of these things.
So I think one question in the climate space is always around mitigation and adaptation, and I think that's a good divide also in a way. Like I tend to be more mitigation focused, and I know your focus is more on adaptation. So could you broadly give an insight on adaptation as a whole, but specifically, how do you see businesses in adaptation as compared to mitigation, and where would you say the similarities are or the nuances in terms of those kind of businesses, and what kind of ecosystem is required there?
Just again, I'm a big person on polls. How many of you are focused on adaptation startups? Well done. And I know you both run the same startups. Just one of you. Okay, that's okay. There's one person out there. One more bravely raising their hand. Okay, good. So please come and see me afterwards. I almost purely specialize in adaptation startups. So, but that proves my point. Okay, in a room full of startups, there's 3 people doing adaptation. And there was a slide which I was supposed to show, which didn't come. But if you just look at the incidence of floods, droughts, storms, it's a vertical graph going up like that. So good, you're working in climate tech, but if you want to say, I want to save the world, you 3 guys have bragging rights. Because if you're doing adaptation, you are helping saving the world. Mitigation, yes, there's a business case. It's really good. You can scale faster, you can get more investment quickly. But saving the world, yeah, because a lot of the mitigation, saving the world types have sort of moved beyond the early startup stage into scale. Yeah, he will, I mean, that's why the conversation is there. But so why don't you go ahead and then I'll bring my other 2 points.
So look, I have always this thought that if you don't mitigate, then you will forever adapt. So that's the thing that we need to think of. So I always look at everything there are a lot of shades. There is no black and white. I think completely adaptation has its very important role. I think the thing around mitigation is, and as you rightly mentioned, solar, for example, is not now a startup play, right? It's gone beyond. But there are so many industries, the whole material industry, from cement to steel, and there are going to be so many different plays. The circularity space is growing, and there are overlaps, right? So for example, cooling. Now when you look at cooling, it is both. When you look at agriculture,
both. Circularity
is both. So I think sometimes my reflection in this is, although I only pose the question of mitigation and adaptation, I think that it's a spectrum at the end of the day, and it's not a clear-cut thing. There will be some things which you can argue are pure, say, like we are doing direct air capture, right? That's on that line of the thing. But I think it's a spectrum at the end of the day. So while from our perspective, we are not always defined that we will only do this. At least we want to become having a problem-solving approach, that if there's a problem in the space and maybe mitigation or a particular technology that does that makes sense, we'll do that. In some cases, we will go for technologies which in traditional way would have been adaptation or things like that. So not getting too much bound, that's been our philosophy on that one.
No, but the thing I'll say is what most people don't realize is my job running 2 MSMEs is all about mitigation. We're 90% renewable. We're one of the most energy efficient factories in the world, and we're all about material, resource efficiency, etc. What my goal is to this community, and this community is about risk taking, right? I mean, we're in venture investing. That's the single most risky part of the investing chain. And when you're there, take the risk, do adaptation. The other thing I will say about adaptation is 2 other things. I think the tipping point, we have several tipping points, not all or nothing, but I think one tipping point is certainly crossed. You can start seeing the Amazon Act very differently. I mean, there is a wetland in the Amazon that's burning at this year. The Antarctic sea ice has had 2 consecutive years of its lowest ever extent. I think we've crossed it, which means this kind of flooding that you're seeing in South Germany, the kind of drought you're seeing in Sicily, all of that is there. My request to the investors in the room is, please talk to your your LPs, etc., and say there is a need for adaptation. There's far too few of us investing in this space. Therefore, there are far too few working in the space, and usually they're working in the overlap space. The last thing I'm going to say, and it comes back to Mirik's first point, is that adaptation tends to be typically capital heavy. Right? It's both with mitigation and adaptation, climate in general. And so I think in mitigation, you at least have some of the carbon flows coming in, so the funding is easier, and adaptation, there's not even that. So it's hard.
But I think to that point, the role of financial, I would call financial engineering, like the whole blended finance concept where you are able to, so sometimes I think if you look at the broader problem and the broader solution doesn't require only this sort of a startup community on the tech side of things, we require the finance angle as well on the room, because you really require innovation on the financial tool side as well. And I know we are working on with a few folks on the blended finance where you get some of the philanthropic money and then you get debt capital so that your adaptation around livelihoods, around restoring degraded land, and that can get in. But that's where, because fundamentally adaptation is, I would say, quantifying water as a price is more difficult. So you will have to have more financial engineering in the adaptation side for sure than in mitigation, where the use case sometimes becomes more easy in a way. And that's why we really need to have a systems lens to it. I think it's not only about a venture community and startups. You really need to get, and we were discussing about, you were mentioning about World Bank and other people potentially looking at the space. So I think how would you say is government and broader global financial, when they have committed this $100 billion to the developing world and things like that, whatever those numbers are. So how would you say that their involvement needs to be, and is there any thought from your perspective?
No, I think like spot on, right? Those people working in adaptation, saving water, etc. Water has a price, right? Today also India has a water price. It's not very obvious. But that price is incentivizing two technologies. Water tankers in the summer, okay, and it's incentivizing bore wells. Whereas the water price in Singapore or Israel is incentivizing a different set of technologies. You don't see water tankers in Israel, in Bangalore you do. Okay, that's a function of the water price. And that in turn is a function of the government, right? So the government has a de facto carbon price on things like petrol and diesel. Therefore, how many EV startups are here? None. Or two. One. Okay, two. So, EV startups, maybe you guys don't even want to come here because you're like, okay, I'll get funding sitting at home. So, it's so hot, and they're growing at such breakneck speeds because there is a real commercial case to be made. Industries like mine pay through our nose for power. So, we are 90% renewable even though we're not that profitable because it makes commercial sense to do so. But you do not have a water price, or your water price incentivizes tankers. Or, for instance, the farm laws, which everybody was jumping up and down about, if they'd actually come to pass, you would have seen an explosion in agri-tech startups because there would have been that regulatory clarity for startups to play in more states than they are playing in now. So the government plays a huge role. There is no thing about it. I'll say a couple of things more and then I'll stop. Government passes policy or implements policy that they believe will get them re-elected. Okay. So in my institute, we went and asked 900 people during a drought whether they would vote on water. What do you think they said? No, most of them said, yeah, we won't vote on water. So don't hold your breath. I think tankers are here to stay for a while. The good news, if you want to see it that way, is that enough places are running out of water that the water startups are rising because the tanker price provides a credible signal for them to innovate now. But it's not just governments. I mean, there is an enormous budget with large corporates, MSMEs, etc., and with supply chains increasingly asking for climate compliance and responsibility, etc. How are they looking at it?
So look, I come from a, again, publicly listed company which has customers in Europe and things like that. And truth be told, I think they say okay, that we want a clear supply chain and things like that. And when I ask them that, look, okay, this is going to be the cost, right? It's at the end of the day a cost, whether I need to retrofit my boilers or whether I need to buy more expensive materials or which is lower carbon footprint. And unfortunately, so far, there is no appetite to actual sort of put your money where your mouth is kind of a system. I think that is growing because of this broader. We have to realize the broader intergovernmental regulations also with CBAM and things like that coming in, that the pricing will definitely be there. But so far, at least, we have not seen someone saying that, look, this is my CO2 price as a company. Like I have a $20 per ton CO2 price. And if your technology is within that range, that's it. I think my one sort of taking that point further, one advice to startups, or at least what I like to say is, what is your technology's effectively CO2 abatement cost? Again, from a more mitigation lens, but fundamentally, if you are able to identify that, then you are able to, I think slowly, the language of the world will be around the CO2 pricing at the end of the day. And then from a company perspective also, every company is now trying to get an internal carbon price sorted. So now then it becomes pretty simple that if your CO2 abatement price is at lower than the company's internal carbon price, then it's easier for them to also accept the solutions like that. So slowly, I think that trend is going to grow. But I think more broadly, people are also starting to link other resources to CO2 as well. So my at least stance would be, eventually there will be a CO2 link price only, but water will be also indirectly linked to CO2, because if I need to extract more water from places or get more tankers from farther, fundamentally it's an energy cost. So there will be those linkages. I think we are still a few years away. But on circularity side, with the EPRs coming in, with India, the EPR being very strong regulation on enhanced producer's responsibility, that I would say is a much more early bet than the carbon side of things.
And the EPR, unfortunately, today when in that space, what a lot of the startups tell me is they're not fed enough because there's not enough segregated waste available. They're available in certain institutions, but they're not. Just to sort of top it up on the corporate side, I'm in an MSME, we're in textiles. A lot of people are saying, yes, we want climate thing, we want your carbon footprint, we want to go negative carbon, etc. They're not willing to pay us for it. So I've brought this up in a sustainable thing. The biggest brands you can think of, they're like, yeah, that's fine, but we want it at no cost. So bad news for you guys. Yeah, it's great you're saving the world, but you need to do it on a budget. That's number one. Number two is smaller companies, MSMEs, don't have the wherewithal to think of like service, etc. Whatever said and done, this is not my core business. So if I'm going to work with you, you better have your service game and your maintenance game figured out. The best thing to do that is to do it in clusters. I was just talking to someone from IIT Madras. It's good to partner with someone who can provide you that capability and have reference customers.
I'll actually like to take Narsi's question. Where is Narsi? I think he put a very, very potent question, and I think I'll share that. Like, will you put serious money behind it, right? So basically, and I think that's a very, very, and first time I have been asked that question, frankly. I think people are happy that we are putting money now. That's the question is, are we putting enough? So, look, and I'll be very open and transparent here. Everyone and every one of you would be doing your own financial planning in life. And you will need to figure out what is the money where are you spending. So we as a family at least have taken a call that setting aside certain amount of capital for ourselves, that's fine. But everything that we want to do after that will have an impact lens. Now, when we say we have an impact lens, it doesn't mean that there is no return expectation. Like the investing in startups, you really want your startups to do well, right, at the end of the day. And I think there is a dual motive there. One is obviously you get good returns, but I think the bigger motive for, I think Mridula will agree, is the fact you are able to create more impact. And that's, if the startup is growing, then it's obviously creating more impact. So, and we have, at least in our philosophy, changed our mindset a bit, that when some of the startups that we invest, because we tend to go quite early in an seed or pre-series A phase, but in some startups which have then taken it up and where their serious capital is required, so as to say, the next round, we have doubled down on them. Having said that, I'll highlight that the amount of capital required in climate is insane. Not even Bill Gates has that amount of money to really solve that whole space. So we have to think of it systematically. We need to think of it how we are able to de-risk the business model and de-risk the technology so the most conservative capital on the stack can come in. So it's not about just 10 of us on the stage and saying that we will be leaders. That is fine. We are doing something, we will do more, and the VCs here are there. But the amount, we are talking about trillions of dollars at the end of the day. So how can you drive down the technological risk and the business model risk, which all of us are doing together, so that in the end we become like a solar solution. We become like a solution which is just bankable. It just makes sense to do it, and there is no questions asked. So that will be my perspective. That it's not. You have to look at it from a systems perspective, not just like 5 people getting excited and doing something. But I don't know what would be your sense on that question from Narsi.
I'll tell you one thing I do. I spend a lot of time in writing. And I can tell you my returns of writing will just, financial returns on writing will make any of your returns just look spectacular. So yeah, I do put serious amounts of time into writing, so that's serious amounts of money. The other thing I would say is, one is, yes, catalysts. So a lot of the policy suggestions on water price, etc., is hopefully having spillover effects. But very often I invest in 3 or 4 angel groups. Right? Many of the angels have come from a tech background. So they look at it with a tech lens. And very often what startups don't realize is, when there is a lead investor pitching for you, we are putting our reputation in line with them. Okay, because I may put X amount of money, but that X can unlock 10X money. And that's not just because of the startup, it's because someone they see familiar is also investing in it. So yes, I don't know whether we have really answered Narsi's question, but that's the answer I would give. But yeah, I mean.
And I think that's the second one also, like what are the domains within the climate tech space? I know water will be an answer for this, but other domains other than water that you would say is something that you are interested in, or you are looking at that space very cleanly?
I think I recently, my institute brought out its waste report, and when we were going there, we realized that burning waste is a very real problem in India and in the developing world. And that unlocks a chemical called TCDD, which is the same chemical that the US Army unloaded in Vietnam and caused all the birth defects and everything else. And it was so dangerous that they took it to a faraway island and detonated it. But we are releasing it in every street corner as we burn waste. So yes, that's a focus. Managing waste.
I think for me, it's always going to be energy at the end of the day. Like the whole energy, it's an energy transition. So, and baseload energy, somewhere the concept of baseload energy becomes very powerful. So whether it's energy storage, and I think today also there was a talk in the morning on IESA on the energy storage requirements of the world. Their numbers are insane. I don't think lithium ion is going to cut it after a certain point of time. It will be an important player at grid scale. But that's
just push a little bit.
Yeah.
Are you doing nuclear at all? Are you looking at nuclear?
We have funded about nuclear fission and fusion. So we have funded.
Where is that? Where is that? Nuclear fusion, where is it?
Fusion is up in the sky, but fission actually, I think it's tangible. We are, it's a thorium nuclear fission based company. So we also fund globally. I think that molten salt reactors are something that needs to be definitely looked at, and small modular reactors. I think government also come out with the Bharat small reactors in this budget and initiative. So for me at least, in fact, again, nuclear is the opportunity that we missed, right, as a society. In 1980s, we were on that path. If we just would have continued on that path, the problems would have been quite different, because in the 1950s, the dream of nuclear was very, very high. Then there were obviously the challenges on 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl and things like that. But so at least we are pretty bullish on nuclear fission, the small modular reactors coming in. But that's a space from an Indian perspective, it's a bit challenging because of the regulations. I think it will be a more government angle and the policy space on that front.
So just to roll it out before we open it up,
Yeah.
what do you look for in investors?
In investors or?
No, sorry. What do you look for in startups?
So we asked basically 2 or 3 critical questions. One is this a problem worth solving? And I think that's also a question which is quite potent. So, okay, sorry. So is this a problem worth solving? So sometimes in some cases, it may be a good solution, but is it a big enough problem? And what we look at in our portfolio thought process is where are the whole emissions coming from and what are the critical areas on that space, including tipping points and things like that. The second thing is then, is this a right team to solve the problem, and do they have the knowledge? And I personally at least like, when I talk to founders, is more technology centric things. So I really like to deep dive into the peer review papers that they would have submitted, or more go into the physics. Like for me, if a presentation has like a physics slide or a phase diagram of some phases of concrete or cement. I think that's where materials is where our key highlight lies. But moreover, now we have thought that we need to be problem solvers. So in some cases, you require the DPI, digital public infrastructure, to solve adaptation problems. So that's fine. So I think we have also evolved in our thought process of not being restricted to a one particular mindset and moreover going to a problem solving mindset. But again, same, any perspective that you have?
I think where I also invest very early, and the only thing I look at there is the founder. I invest only in climate, so that lens is already there. Typically adaptation, but don't worry, guys. I do mitigation. I have investments in EV, so there you go. But I look at the founder. Okay, and what do I look at? I have older founders. I don't look at age. I think older you are, better it is. I look for someone who can stay the course, and I look for evidences in their track record for that. I think that's what you need. It's still a tough space. I look for evidences of that. If it's a tech-heavy startup, then I look for patent protection, the ability to the pedigree, all of that. If it's not a tech solution, then I look for no BS. And then I think the no BS sniff test also. I don't do like very heavy tech. I've done a few, but I mean this is really what I look at. Any questions?
I think we wanted to keep it more open-ended in the
Any
second.
questions, guys? I saw a lot of startup hands go up. You heard them. Any questions for either of them? Oh, they will be very easy on you, even if you ask a tough question. They may still cut a check, don't worry.
You asked the toughest question, Narsi, of are we putting serious effort on this?
Yes, go ahead. You have a mic, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks for a very interesting talk. So as I mentioned earlier also, we do CO2 emissions to ethylene, right? So in terms of CO2 utilization, have you all sort of looked at that space at all? Is this something you would look at? And at what TRL would be like sort of the ideal for you all to enter?
So we have actually signed an LOI with a CO2 to ethylene company. It's not an Indian company, but we should talk because we as a company are consuming 5,000 tons of ethylene a year. That's more on the company side. From an investment perspective, I think if you look at the whole carbon capture space, without utilization, it doesn't really work. The whole geological storage doesn't really make sense. You really need to put like I don't know how many thousand kilometers of CO2 pipeline. And Norway can do that because they have the money. We can't. So I don't think that will possible. So utilization definitely is a space. Now in terms of utilization, there are certain key aspects that from an ethylene perspective, I say we need to take care is like someone talked to me about that if I do carbon capture at a cement plant and then convert that into ethylene. Now ethylene transportation is an issue. So I'm not specifically asking, but what I would look at in solutions is the whole integrated mindset has to be there. Because sometimes when we realize when you make a chemical product out of CO2, that product transportation is also challenging, specifically in these cases. So you ideally want to have a business model where it's a more integrated approach where the product is being utilized then and there is a thing that I would...
I mean, for us, it's more about decarbonizing the PVC and the HDPE market, which is using ethylene in-house, right? So they also have process emissions, which we're sort of circling back for them.
So I think that makes sense. I think the thing that I would always look at is there is going to be a competition from the bio source as well. And how are you competing? For example, for ethylene, you can generate ethylene from ethanol. And there are again, I don't want to go specifically to your point. I am just saying that whenever you are looking at CO2 to X, it is going to be important. And so one thing that I don't find nice in this is people use this statement that give me cheap renewable energy and I can do CO2 to X. That is valid for everything. If I give you cheap renewable energy, you can do anything in the world because you have cheap energy at the end of the day, right? So when you do a comparative study, it has to have the right economics of electricity prices in it, which have to be there. And sometimes people just do a 1 cent whatever price and then that business model works. So that will be the lens that I would look at. And I've been critical on some of those companies who say we are reducing the emission by 90% and still cheaper. And when I look at the electricity price, it's virtually zero. Or they say I will use waste heat. Now, if you are using waste heat, then there's an opportunity cost attached to it. So these are some of the conversations that we had earlier in the earlier panel, that understanding from a systems lens is very, very important. In that one particular use case, it may still work. But yeah, I completely understand CO2 makes a lot of sense. I think CO2 ethylene makes a lot of sense for sure.
And it's also the hardware costs involved, not just the
That's
solar
also
prices,
important,
right?
like-
So everything has to come down, and like in our case, it's 50-60% of the cost of the end product is dependent on the external factors besides the efficiency, right, of the system. So
Any
Yeah.
other questions, guys?
You touched upon blended finance. Do you think there's access to foreign capital in terms of commercialization? And the second point is the structure of non-profit and profit. How does a startup like us that has no experience in this space go about it?
I'll take the blend. You take the
I'll go for the non-profit's very easy. Whatever your company's name is, just put that .org, and then create the non-profit. It's not very difficult. Look, it's not difficult. Okay, just create a trust. Keep it separate. Keep your account separate. And I know, no, I'm telling you, I have a company .com and .org. Parallel thing, like a lot of the manpower is the same. It's very easy. And when you do that, your grant capitals will start unlocking.
But just a question, like following up that, because I have seen someone when I was talking to a foreign foundation and they said that the clarity that this is going for public good has to be clear when they are funding something. So if this is a kind of structure, then isn't there a risk that someone can say, okay, look, this is going to this, but eventually the money is only going to the private limited company? How do you?
No. So that's a great question. So let me talk about one agri-tech company that is working with farmers to save water, right? You need to handhold, and the selling cycle is very long because there's a lot of education on farmers on why save water, hand-holding, all of that. That is a public good because the farmers are tapping into groundwater, right? To use your very, very expensive, startup venture equity for that is extremely stupid.
And I think just on the blended finance question, I think that, and we are discussing with a few companies try to create the right model. So now with the foreign capital piece coming in, whether I was discussing last week with someone on creating AIFs basically. First project specific AIFs, then trying to fund that whole project where you are able to, and it's challenging. I think we should discuss. There is now this blended finance company. That's a good company you should talk to, and they are trying to create some model. I think there are others as well. But that will be effectively very, very powerful. And from a philanthropic perspective also, there's a very large bang for their buck, right? Effectively, they are putting X capital and they are able to leverage debt finance on top of it. So that makes a lot of.
Guys, thank you very much. I would have liked to have more questions. It's really seriously running out of time. Mridula is here for some time. Mirik is going off today, but he might be available right after the session for some time. So do catch them. I'm sure you'll have many more questions. Thank you very much, both of you. I think it's been a shorter session than what we wanted, but I think it was very powerful. I think you guys are willing to face tough questions and answer them. Pashu, can you come up for a moment? Today seems to be a day full of celebrities, so Pashu adds to the list. Many of you might know about Pashupati Gopalan. He was the CEO of Sun Edison. And, here. He'll give the mementos. So Pashu is from, he was earlier with Sun Edison. He was the CEO of India. And if you can give the mementos to them. Then if you guys can stand together. Yeah, that's the way it is.